Hi, fans of high quality entertainment. I just posted this in my community for just over an hour and just asking, which of these top 100 albums of the year, for different years on Billboard you would like me to react to. And over 50% of you chose 1970. So that's what I'm going to do. And also, yesterday, I did a live chat with Giggins and Americana Sam, mainly about the Beach Boys, a little bit of Sparks also. So if you haven't checked out that live chat, please do. That was a fun chat. So here is the Billboard 200, the week of, near the end of 1970. And just going to let you know the albums I've heard or haven't heard. And let me know, like I said, what your favorites are. Okay, so number one was Abraxas from Santana. I used to have the very first three Santana albums a few years back. I enjoyed them, but I never played them, so I sold them. All Things Must Pass, I own. Great album. I used to have Sly and the Family Stone's Greatest Hits, the vinyl of that in the early 70s. And I do have a 2-disc of all of their hits. Stephen Stills, I remember one of my older brothers used to buy the first few Stephen Stills albums, and I just never got into his solo career. Of course, Grand Funk live album is one of my all-time favorite live albums. I never bought any Carpenters. Not that, I respect them and everything, but just really not my kind of thing to listen to. I never bought the soundtrack for Jesus Christ Superstar. I think I did hear bits of the album in the early 70s. I think one of my friends had it. Led Zeppelin 3, of course, I have. It's a classic. I never bought any Partridge Family albums. I never actually even really watched the TV show. I was more of a Bewitched and Brady Bunch kind of a fan. Sweet Baby James, I never bought. James Taylor. No Isaac Hayes. I've never bought any Jackson 5 albums or Neil Diamond. Of course, I do have the Plastic Ono Band album by John Lennon, probably my favorite of his. Pendulum, I think Pendulum is underrated. It doesn't get the love. Of course, Cosmo's Factory is probably, at least for me, the greatest CCR album, but Pendulum was, an excellent follow-up. New Morning, I've never bought or heard. Elton John, I never bought his, I guess that's called his debut album. I know there was one before it. Naturally, I did have by Three Dog Night. I used to have a few Three Dog Night albums in the 70s, and I do have a Greatest Hits compilation. Steppenwolf 7, I've got the box set of all of the Steppenwolf albums, their early albums, and that's a excellent album. Chicago 2, I used to own. I don't have it anymore. I just never, the way I am, especially now that I'm older, if there's albums in there that sit in there for year after year after year, and I know I might play them once every 5 years, it's like, I'm done. The Worst of Jefferson Airplane, which of course is the best of Jefferson Airplane. One of my older brothers had that album. I do have Volunteers, and a couple of others. There's Cosmo's Factory, great album. And of course, Black Sabbath, their debut, which I own. Woodstock. I've never had the original soundtrack for Woodstock on CD. I maybe it was one of my older brothers had it on vinyl, the 3-disc I did have Woodstock 2, but not 1. But I have heard. I would like to kind of get that on CD. Never bought That's the Way It Is by Elvis or Judy Collins. Layla, I had really no interest in that. You know, I do love the song Layla, but that's about it. All right, Badfinger, No Dice. I've got that in my collection. Yeah. Great album, very underrated. The Doors 13, which is like a compilation. I've never owned that, but I've got all of the, the Doors albums with Jim Morrison. 10 years after, I never bought any of their albums. I never bought any Ray Price albums. Of course, I've got Tommy by The Who, great album. I've never bought any Neil Diamond, although I do like his songs, his hit singles. After the Gold Rush, I used to have on vinyl, and I think I had it on CD, but like I said, it's a really good album, but I would just never play it. Blows Against the Empire, I've never heard. Fifth Dimension, The Temptations, The Moody Blues. I'm a big Moody Blues fan. Question of Balance is excellent. Not into The Grateful Dead. The only album of theirs I ever owned was Anthem of the Sun in the early 70s, which I didn't mind. It was good. I've never had his band and the Street Choir by Van Morrison. Of course, Closer to Home by Grand Funk I love. Never bought any Diana Ross. Never bought any Byrds albums. I know. Or I don't have the Johnny Cash show. Share the Land I've had it on vinyl, and I do have it on CD. Never bought any Curtis Mayfield or Emmett Rhodes. Deja Vu. I need to get that again on CD. I did have it on CD. Mad Dogs and Englishmen, I've heard the album, but I've never owned it. But I do have some of the early Joe Cocker albums. Bobby Sherman, never bought any Bobby Sherman. Dionne Warwick, Blood Rock 2. That's the one, I believe, with DOA on it, which is a pretty freaky track, especially, for the very early 70s. And they were a good band. They were, fairly well known in the early 70s. But I don't think I ever bought any of their albums. But I've heard some of them. I've got Get Your Ya-Ya's Out by the Rolling Stones. Great live album. No B.B. King. Adam Hart Mother. That's one of the Pink Floyd albums I don't have in my collection. I did have it on CD. I don't think I'm ever going to get it again because the times I would play it, I just thought it was okay. Roberta Flack, Arlo Guthrie, Tom Jones. One of my favorite Kinks albums, Lola versus Powerman and the Money Go Round, Part 1. We're all still waiting for Part 2. Never bought any Isaac Hayes. There's the first Chicago album, which I did have at one point. Never bought Buddy Miles or James Brown. I love James Brown. I would like to get like a compilation of his hits. Bridge Over Troubled Water is, I think, a viewer gifted me a couple of Simon & Garfunkel albums, and that's one of them. Probably, along with Bookends, my favorite Simon & Garfunkel album. Nancy Wilson. The only Blood, Sweat, and Tears I have is their debut album, which is awesome. I did have John Barleycorn Must Die, but I just couldn't get into it. So I don't have that anymore. I do have one Savoy Brown album, but it's not looking in. It's Street Corner Talking, which is great. I never bought any free albums, although, I do like them. I would like to get the James Gang on CD because I've become a big fan of Joe Walsh and his solo albums. I kind of missed out on that. My older brother was into Joe Walsh, and I was into other things back then. But I've got Barnstorm and a couple of others, and really impressed with his solo albums. No Supremes, no Anne Murray. Never really gotten into the Allman Brothers Band, but I do some reactions on, there's so much music out there, and I do listen to even current stuff. On my Patreon, people give me songs to react to and albums, so I listen to a wide range of music, and I really do like a lot of what I've heard. I plan to do a video actually to just kind of go over some of the stuff I've heard on my Patreon. I did have a Buddy Miles album, but it wasn't Them Changes. I love Jimi Hendrix, but back in the day, I only had maybe his debut album on vinyl at one point, but I'm starting to pick up all of his early albums. The Glenn Campbell Good Time album, never had, but great talent, great guitarist. No Four Tops, Sugarloaf, they had a couple of pretty big hits. Green-Eyed Lady and Don't Call Us, We'll Call You, but I never bought their albums. John Mayall, I never bought. Almost in Love, I did have that album. But I don't have anything by Elvis Presley at the moment. Kiln House, I've never bought or heard. I have The Who live at Leeds, the deluxe version. Believe it or not, I do have the soundtrack for the Beatles' Let It Be. James Taylor, I never bought. Joan Baez, Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, the first Santana. I did enjoy the early Santana albums, but there's just other stuff I would rather listen to. Rare Earth, I think they were a really good band. I've never owned any of their albums, but any of their songs I've heard, I've really been impressed with. I don't mind Kenny Rogers, but I never bought any of his albums. The Sesame Street Book and Record. I've never owned that. No Neil Diamond. Laura Nyro. I never bought any of... Is it Niro? Nyro? I never bought any of her albums. Stage Fright, the band. I love the band. I just recently did a video saying how I finally connected with music from Big Pink. My favorite has been Cahoots, but I finally realized what a great album music from Big Pink is. Just took me a few years. Gypsy, I've never even heard of. I've got Steppenwolf Live, great live album. Charlie Pride, I just remember him. My dad used to buy some of his albums, and I always enjoyed, I liked the old country. I didn't mind that. No Aretha Franklin. There's another Rare Earth, Ecology I've never bought. And Three Dog Night, a very underrated band. That's one of the albums I never did own, but I had other ones. Naturally, Harmony. I think I have their greatest hits compilation and Suitable for Framing. I was trying to remember the album cover. So I'll just quickly go through some of these others. McCartney, his debut album at 105. I love that album. I've heard Metamorphosis, good album. Future Blues, I have that. I love that. I used to own Leftover Wine by Melanie. I didn't mind it. So Led Zeppelin 2, it's from 1969, but still on the charts. Of course, I have that. I've never had that Ringo Country album. I have Sly and the Family Stone, like I said, Greatest Hits compilation, but I've never owned the album stand. I would like to get it. I don't have Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, but I used to have it on CD. Very good album. Candida, we can make it together. Never owned it. The Archie's Greatest Hits. Chunga's Revenge I own. See what else I have here. The debut album, Crosby, Stills and Nash, I have. Grand Funk. The Red album I own. I do have the Beatles' Abbey Road. Never bought Eric Clapton's debut. Benefit, I've never owned. Green River I have by Creedence. American Woman I have by the Guess Who. I used to have Inagata Davida, not anymore. Deep Purple and Rock, good album. I used to have that. I love the Moody Blues. I've got that on CD. We're almost done here. English muffins. Oh, I definitely want to get some Donovan CDs. I've got Willie and the Poor Boys. Bridget Pink I never bought. I've never heard False Start by Love. Never bought any Big Brother and the Holding Company. Number 5. Nope. We're nearing the end here. That's a great album. I do have that. I've got a box set of their early albums. 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus by Spirit. And that is it. So yeah, let me know what your favorite albums that are on this list here at the end of 1970. I guess my favorite would have to be Abbey Road. It was kind of cool that Abbey Road was still on the charts like a year later. It's like they were popular or something. So that's it. Thank you for watching. I'm looking forward to your comments below. Bye.